Welcome to another episode of Cutting Edge Health, Cutting Edge Pain Relief. And in this episode, I have the extreme pleasure of being able to talk to one of the most unique, interesting, and really thoughtful, innovative CEOs I've had the pleasure of being able to interview. Today, we're going to talk to you about a company that is really looking how to be able to meet the patient where they happen to be. I don't know if you're anything like me, but there have been times where I've gone to a doc's office and I've heard them explain something. And being a doc, I pretty much get it most of the time, but not all the time. And sometimes it goes right past. And I know I've had patients say this to me. I've had family members say this to me, and they just really weren't able to garner all the information that was given to them, particularly when you're dealing with things like radiographs, like X-rays and MRIs and CTs. You can get the report, but trying to interpret it can be incredibly difficult to be able to figure out. So much so that you walk away and you're just like this. And it's really kind of that feeling of like, it's beyond my scope, that I can't be able to understand this, that it's sciencey, and we just don't really be able to understand how to be able to put it together. Well, today I have someone who said, you know what? We got an answer and solution for that. And so I welcome Josh to the program. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Thank you for being willing to be able to be available for your time, and really for finding a solution for patients that really is a much needed one.
Thanks. Thanks so much for having me here. I love that intro. Great.
So as I understand it, you have a company, and that company is a heck of a company. And if you don't mind, I'm going to kind of pop it up here real quick. And can you tell us this company? How do you say it again? What is it?
It's called Mediphany, which is supposed to be short for medical epiphany, which is the idea of giving patients an epiphany about what's going on inside of themselves, what's going on in their bodies that they're not finding out in the current normal practice of medicine.
Right. So, and thank you for those of you who are joining us live. As always, we really appreciate that. If you have questions, by all means, shoot them in the chat, and we'll see what we can do about being able to pose those questions. So many times, people have these various different imaging that comes up, and they might have a disc or something that they can pull up on a computer. We're like, what the heck is this gobbledygook? It doesn't look anything like me. I have no idea what this is. And as I understand it, really one of the things that you guys do is really help explain those radiology results. You really get down to the nitty gritty, and it makes sense. But before I kind of let you really kind of go running, because I can see you're ready to kind of get out the chutes, I got to kind of embarrass you a little bit, right? So Josh here, besides being personable, besides being innovative, is actually a pretty top-notch doc. And I'm lucky to be on the public on this video with him. He's an expert in musculoskeletal radiology, trained at Johns Hopkins, did his fellowship at Cleveland Clinic. So, I mean, you're kicking butt and taking names. You are really the man in terms of being able to talk about this kind of context of looking at radiology and explaining it in depth and detail. And we know, for those of you who join us with some degree of frequency, one of the things that we look at is what's the science behind it. So kind of popping up a quick few papers for those of you who are going to watch this at a later date and kind of reference it, and maybe give it to other people that you think are of interest. He's going to explain to you what Mediphany really is, obviously way better than what I could. But at the end of the day, the things that we want to know is, so how does this help patients? And he's going to give you the details of that. But when we look at it from a science standpoint, one of the things that we've seen is that videos really do help patients understand complicated medical terminology and such. We'll give patients brochures, but sometimes the brochures just don't really kind of get the job done. And what they've seen in studies is that 20% of patients were able to see an increase in their understanding, particularly for complicated topics. And this was actually in the Journal of Cancer, the paper that I was just referencing. But they've also seen that multimedia for MSK and osteoarthritis has really been significant in this paper's in Arthritis Care and Research, where they saw that it was able to improve health outcomes and key decision making, which is really one of the things that's most important. You can't make a decision if you don't know what the heck is going on with you. And, you know, that paper had a conclusion of it was helping patients to not only understand, but also be able to manage their disease, and had nothing to do with like this being a plant by Josh. This was something that we were looking at, and we happened to come across this actually by happenstance when I was in California for a conference, and I ran into him. He's sitting right next to me, and I'm like, "What do you do?" And he starts explaining this stuff to me. And I was like, we got to get you on this podcast, man. We got to have people know a lot more about this, because I think this would be a phenomenal topic for people to be exposed to the product and what's going on. So kind of just kicking it off, can you explain what Mediphany is in layperson's terms? Because we know you're super smart. We know, you know, your resume precedes you in terms of like who you are and what you're capable of. So bring it down so that we can be able to kind of keep in play with you and explain this to me in particular. Like I'm a 5-year-old, so I can be able to kind of get it. Okay. So I'm pretty darn excited on hearing this. All right. All right. So tell me what's going on.
I'll do my best.
All right.
Mediphany is a company that provides a service for patients that basically has a radiologist explain the patient's imaging findings to them in a way that they can understand, using video, comparing it to normal examples, using 3D models, anything that it takes so that a patient can actually understand what their imaging findings are instead of getting a complicated jargon-filled report in their electronic medical record.
Okay. And I think you have like a couple video explanations so people can really kind of see it, so that they do get that sense of like being able to kind of explain it, right? So that, you know, people get that semblance of understanding. And you don't mind if I kind of pop up this sort of 30-second video that that I think we're taking straight from your site. And then maybe after this pops up, then you can kind of explain what it is that we saw. Is that good?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's looping through at that point. So what that was showing, that was a video that was showing some of the features of what we do with Mediphany. We essentially create a personalized, custom-made video from a radiologist that's meant directly for a patient, where we point out their findings on their imaging study. And then you saw in those images, there was things like the comparison to a normal example, or illustrations or 3D models that help to place where that finding is on the patient's body. And so you can really understand what's going on inside. And that's what we were showing just now.
So I'm curious, how did you come up with this idea? Like, was this something that you always like, you know, like before you became a doc, you're like, you know what, this is how I'm going to revolutionize the world. What was it that made you come up with this epiphany for Mediphany?
Ooh, I like that. No, it wasn't that. It's really from my own experiences. And just like you can imagine, I bet you've had the same experience where not only your patients, but maybe even your family members sometimes come to you with one of these reports and is like, I got this spine MRI. What does this mean? It's talking about something called spondylosis and stenosis, and I don't know what these terms mean and what it means for me. Well, I had that experience with not only my family members and friends, but patients too. I mean, shockingly, I also do procedures on people like you do. And it's not uncommon to meet a patient who's going to get a biopsy of their spine, for example, who's never actually seen the images, who actually doesn't know really what is about to happen because no one has taken the time to really review those pictures with them and explain what they mean. So I could tell this was something that patients needed. And the question was sort of how to do it. And I can go into the story of that if you're interested, or something else.
Josh, of course we're interested. I mean, but I can see that you're not a novice to dealing with live streams, because I could see you kind of baited the hook. It was like a Netflix special. Like, what's the next episode going to be? But I am kind of curious before we kind of delve into that. I mean, to me, one of the things I think that makes this incredibly unique is that you've been able to say, let's deploy video. And historically, docs offices and the aspect of medicine has been kind of these trifold old school brochures that have been out since the 1970s. Yeah. And you could have said, you know what? I don't know, man, let's get us 10 brochures and we'll give it to the person, and that'll give them a simple kind of explanation of spondylosis or spondylolisthesis, and they'll be fine, right? But right. No, you said, no, we need to do this via video. What made you decide to do that?
I mean, I think it's a couple of things. One, of course, is this is a custom-made thing, right? It's not just about what is spondylosis in general. It's what does it mean for me as a patient? What does my body look like? So having those brochures, while nice in a general sense, don't really help people understand what's going on inside their own body. And then if the other, from video, I think from my perspective, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, I mean, I don't know, is a video worth 1,000,000 words? It's so much more descriptive, and it's so much better at explaining what's really happening, that it was a no-brainer that video is the way to go.
Gotcha. And I think, one of the nuggets of that is it's personalized to that patient, right? And that might have been something I was kind of skipping over to an extent. And I know you're going to go into more detail about that, but that's pretty darn cool, because it's not just some generalized piece. It's really taking their study and kind of pointing out, at least, and correct me if I'm wrong, some of the aspects of what's normal, what's abnormal. And that's one of the things that we saw in that clip that kind of went through different things where you're able to highlight that. Can you expound on that a little bit further for me?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that we do that's most commented on by patients is we compare their study to, let's say, a normal example, or in some cases an abnormal example. And that helps them to understand things much better than just pointing it out. As an example, a recent example, someone had a stress fracture of their heel bone. And this person was sort of like, they knew it was something abnormal, but they didn't really know the extent or the severity of the problem. But once they saw it, and they saw it in comparison against a normal example and how severe it was, it dramatically impacted their view of the seriousness of the problem. And they were much more diligent, like to your point earlier about education too, much more willing to make the sacrifices necessary to ensure that heel was going to heal. And that power of seeing normal versus abnormal, or even normal versus normal. Sometimes people have symptoms and they're convinced there's something there. It's reassuring when they can see an actual comparison and say, oh, I see it looks kind of the same as that. So their ability to judge a finding and its severity and its presence is enhanced tremendously, and it's super helpful.
That's pretty darn powerful. That's really cool. I think a number of our other kind of viewers who are watching right now feel the same type of way. They are putting up different things like, oh, wow, that was a great idea. This is a great subject. We really, really appreciate you talking about this type of product. What I would probably imagine is that there's a number of viewers, both now and maybe in the future, that would probably say, yeah, but this sounds super techy and complicated. And I'm just curious, one, do I have the right kind of computer system to even be able to see this video? And also, how do I figure out how to get stuff to you? Because I may not be some tech whiz kid, Star Trek, Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica kind of person that knows how to be able to do this. How do you guys do that from a process standpoint in order to be able to make this attainable for the average person, Josh?
Sure. By the way, I think you probably are a Battlestar Galactica kind of guy. That's my guess. We've tried to make it as easy as possible. Images are tricky in the sense that hospital systems tend to hold them, and they don't often easily send them to patients. probably anyone watching this has had the experience where if they want a copy, they can ask at the time they get their scan or later on, and they'll get a disc like a CD. Well, not everybody has a CD drive, but that's one way that we frequently get images uploaded to us. We have an online portal, and just like you would upload a file to a Google Drive or to your computer, it's a matter of just pointing to the files, hitting upload, and the images come to us. It's pretty straightforward. Another way that people tend to do it is some imaging sites have an online portal where they store the images and give you some access code to be able to see them. And if you have that, then it's just a matter of sharing the access credentials with Mediphany, and we can look at the images directly without any uploading or anything like that. And then finally, there are some groups that we work with where the radiology center can actually push the images directly to us. That's a more involved process that most patients can't just control on their own. That's more of a relationship between Mediphany and the imaging center. But those are kind of the three ways we get images.
I gotta tell you, that's pretty darn powerful. I've heard of, the upload, like as you mentioned for Google Drive, but really, I mean, you're very modest, but I think having really gone after it like that, if it was Kevin Hart, he would definitely be like, that's some pretty impressive utility, because I think you make it fairly easy for the patient. So I'm going to kind of try and see if I can be able to recapitulate or state that over again. So one, the patient could be able to send it to you directly if they have a way to be able to use an optical drive or CD. Two is that, and I would imagine that you could be able to have access to the components of the imaging site or facility that originally took the images. And then the other option is that they, meaning the facility, could possibly be able to send it to you directly using fancy kind of radiology type magic as you guys make happen, right?
Right.
Exactly. So, I mean, I think that having multiple different tools and clubs in the bag to be able to get that process is huge for being able to really making this actionable for a lot of patients, because not everyone can be able to upload and do things. And I really think that that's one of the unique things about you guys, besides just really taking this whole concept and saying, let's do this video, explain it to patients so they get it. But being able to actually make the rubber meet the road is where I think is something that's incredibly unique. And you guys have been doing it and doing it right for a while. I'm curious, are there certain study types that you guys can do, and what body parts can you do? Can you explain that a little bit so patients have an idea about saying, well, hey, I'm watching this video and Landrum does a lot of different things that might be in the musculoskeletal frame, but what if I had something that might be surgical, like general surgery, or something that was orthopedic, or something that was obstetrical? Can you comment on those type of things or give us some explanation about what it is that you might do in that?
For sure. We really can do just about everything. We don't do echocardiograms. That's an ultrasound of the heart, at least right now, but essentially everything else we do. I think that ultrasounds sometimes are more difficult to translate, because I don't know if you've ever seen an ultrasound image, but it looks like a snowstorm. We can do them, but most commonly we get MRIs and CT scans of head to toe, anything. Chest, abdomen, pelvis, brain, spine, everything.
Okay, phenomenal. I think we have a question coming in from one of the people that are watching, and I think it's a phenomenal question. It looks like Elaine, who's actually a previous nurse in a pain clinic, as a matter of fact, who has a fair amount of expertise. She poses, so what's the turnaround time for something like this?
We kind of have two different options for that. We have a conventional, our conventional product is a 3-day, 72-hour turnaround. And we also have an expedited 24-hour turnaround time.
I'm sorry, did you say 24 hours?
What? Yes, I did.
So this is like the drones that deliver from like Amazon, like it's 24 hours. Like, I mean, that's pretty darn fast and impressive. Okay. Wow.
Yeah, there are a lot of patients who really, there are a number of things, of course, that are appealing to people. And one of them is time. I mean, they really, especially in certain circumstances, they really want to find those results and understand their results fast. And that's what we're about, is trying to help people understand their results.
So when they're able to kind of get this video to understand it, is there a way for them to share with people who are important to them that helps them make decisions? Like, so for instance, if it's their spouse or if they have maybe, a child or sibling who might be within the medical profession, they say, hey, I've got this and I've heard this video. Can you be able to take a listen or watch this as well? Is there a way for them to be able to kind of
Yeah.
provide that?
Absolutely. It's a great question. We have a sharing function. It's very simple. It sends a link to that video, which is stored in the cloud so that they can easily access. So anyone you want to send that to can easily access it, whether it's your doctor, your family member, your child, as you said, or your parent. We think that's a very important part of this. Not only do we want, healthcare is really a team sport. You need the support of your family and probably several healthcare providers. And providing this to them is very easy with Mediphany. And also they have the ability to watch this video multiple times. So sometimes things don't come through the first time well, or it's so much information. This allows people to review it. And again, their family members can review it so that everybody's kind of on the same page. Unlike the conventional situation where you go to the doctor, you find out some results, you kind of don't remember everything. And when you go back and your family member says, what did the doctor say? You said, I think I need surgery. And that's it. You don't remember. This is a recorded thing that they can be watched as much as needed.
I gotta tell you, I think that's incredibly impressive. I'm just saying, man, and I'm not trying to, blow wind up your skirt, but I think this is phenomenal because there's so many patients that have the same problem that comes into offices time and time again. And to me, I'd be really curious about, kind of the take up of Mediphany over the next, year and a half, 2 years, because we hope that, across the board, patients really are like, hey, I want this because I think it will help with decision-making processes, being able to connect people that are within their support network that help them make decisions. I think it's a phenomenal thing. And to be frank with you, even within the medical profession, I think a lot of times radiologists are kind of seen as sort of like this person that's in the dark. They give you a rendering, but they may not explain anything. So can you maybe debunk some of the myths about radiology, explain to us like what you think is kind of the insider's code and understanding of what you guys do?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious what these myths are that are out there. I think one you hit on, right, is the guy in the room who's like Gollum and he's pale. Although I'm kind of pale, but like that we don't like to talk to human beings. I hope that I'm debunking that right now by talking to you. What we do is a very technical thing that in the past has really been centered on a doctor-to-doctor communication. It's really, and the report, historical report and current reports are about a radiologist communicating with another doctor and not necessarily with a patient. And I guess what I would say is, we're doctors too, and we do care about patients. We want to make sure that we do a good job for them. So we really do try to provide information that's going to help people. And I think that's something that people tend not to know about radiologists.
Yeah, I think that you're right, spot on with that. We got a few questions that are coming in. I think that there's some about questions and how would someone be able to contact who rendered the video? Is that something that's doable, or what? Do you have something in process for something like that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we have a couple of things related to that. First of all, when people submit a request to us, we have an area where people can ask any questions up front that they have about their report. We do collect the images and the official report because we view this as an educational service. It's not really a second opinion per se. So we're explaining those findings. And if there are questions about those findings, patients can ask that right up front. And if there's something that's not clear from what we've made, some video, yes, patients can write to us and we can try to get clarity from the radiologist that made that video report. Sorry, was there a second part of that I missed? I think that was what you were asking.
Yeah. The other thing that I'd be curious about, I think you explained this to me once, whether it was doable or not, is if a patient had sequential images. So let's say that they had an MRI of the knee in January, and then they had another MRI of the knee maybe sometime in October. can you be able to compare and contrast, or is that something you guys are working on in the future, I think, maybe, or where are you at with that?
No, we do that, but we do it in, again, we do have this sort of, I guess, limitation about medical licensure. So a person in Ohio, which is where I'm based, could provide a medical opinion to someone in Oregon if they have licensure in both states. But we don't have all of our radiologists in all states. So we can't really provide what we would consider like a true second opinion in that regard. But if a knee MRI, like you mentioned, is interpreted and it's compared to a prior one, and that's discussed in the report, then absolutely, we take both sets of images, the new and the old, and show them relative to one another. So we can show people the changes that occurred as they were described in the report, and help them understand changes over time, which I agree is a very important thing to do.
Okay. As a company, what are you guys curious about, right now, and what are you looking to move forward into next steps?
Well, I think, because of our long-term hope is really that this is kind of the way radiology ought to be done in the future. And to make that happen, I think what we'd really like to do is to start working with larger health systems who will be willing to actually play around with doing that. And we're in some conversations about that now. So I hope we'll get the chance to do that. And in that way, be able to explore how that can be done practically in a way that's acceptable to radiologists, to patients, and to referring doctors as well.
Okay. So I think we're going to ask you some questions that maybe kind of diverge a little bit from just sort of the focus on Mediphany as a whole. But what really makes you inspired? What's the thing that kind of is your motivating driver, Josh, as you kind of go about things day to day and putting forth a company like this? I mean, it's pretty unique, and I know you're a super humble guy. I mean, we've talked over a period of time, and you're like, yeah, I put together this company, yeah, no big deal. But I mean, it's pretty darn unique to have something that really addresses what I think is a major black hole for many patients that come in and out of offices and are just like, I don't know what they just said. I mean, what inspires you as a whole to say, hey, this is what kind of gets you up in the morning?
Yeah. Well, I've always, and probably you're the same way. I mean, I look at things, and when things don't make sense, I want them to change. And if you look back, 100 years, more than 100 years ago, you could get a radiology report and it looked, other than the fact that it was handwritten instead of typed, it's kind of the same. It's 100 years of just descriptions and technology features and jargon. And we're in a totally different era. I mean, we're in an era where people appropriately expect for the care to be directed towards them. It's not about the doctor. It's not about the insurance company. It's about them. And we need to be able to provide that kind of care. We need to be able to provide a service that allows them to be understanding of what's going on so that they can be engaged in the decision process and make appropriate decisions. And it's just so obvious to me that that's necessary, that drives me. I mean, I think that this is the way that things ought to happen. And I want to try to make that happen if I can.
Understood. I mean, that almost sounds, I think for many systems, healthcare systems, they'd probably kind of classify that almost as like a concierge type delivery. And maybe that shouldn't be quite deemed concierge, and it needs to be more universal. But at the very least, it certainly is personable to the person, and what's going on from a unique standpoint. It gives them something that they would not find anyplace else. Just out of curiosity, I think that there's a number of patients that will say, yeah, can I afford this? What's the financial outlay for something like this? Can you kind of touch on some of that type of topic so people can understand like what that means and how doctors might partner with you and patients might be able to go after this?
It's a fair question. It is not a service that's covered by insurance. So it is an out-of-pocket expense for patients or for doctor practices. We do have some practices that are paying on behalf of their patients. The cost right now for our 3-day turnaround is $95, and for 1-day turnaround is $150 for a video report. And like, you were talking about concierge and the universal nature of it. I mean, the way I'm looking at it is, it's, of course, not everyone can afford that or wants to pay for that, sees the value in that right now. But there are people who do. And just like I remember the day when there were things called car phones, which were just giant boxes that would sit in your car. And, of course, eventually they became these things that pretty much everybody has. I'm hoping that something similar will happen here, that as people understand the value here, again, realizing that not everyone's going to be able to get this from the start, that over time, this will become the routine. This will become the standard. It will become more affordable and universal.
Understood. So where can patients find this? Because what sometimes happens is we have these live stream videos, right? And patients are like, yeah, I was really interested in this, but then I went to my doctor that was local and they never heard of it at all. And they couldn't find it. And they said, oh, their nurse didn't know it and they didn't know where to go. So sometimes, you literally do have to drag the horse to water. And sometimes patients really sometimes do have to bring their doctor on board so they can get it and maybe even show them this video. So if they were looking for how they find you, where do they go to find this Mediphany?
I mean, I think the best thing to do is go directly to our website, mediphany.com. Mediphany is spelled MEDIPHANY.com. Again, there you go. Thank you very much. That has... it explains the service. It shows some examples. It has pricing and other information that will help anyone who's interested in this. And of course, there's also the opportunity to reach out to us with any questions through the website as well.
Okay. And I think you talked about, looking at projections and where things are going. So let's say that you can be able to, let's fast forward 3 years from now.
Yeah.
What would you have hoped might have changed with how Mediphany interacts with the world as a whole?
Well, I think part of it is I'm hoping something changes in the world a little bit, which is that that flow of images becomes much more routine. And I think there's some good evidence that will happen, that more and more places that acquire images, when you go to your MRI imaging center, for example, that those images will be yours as the patient and you'll be able to access them wherever you are. But I think that really my hope would be 3 years from now, we have some major health systems using this, maybe initially in that kind of a concierge niche that you were talking about, but also for lots of other reasons, things like pre-surgical planning for complicated surgeries and other things like that. And that all of that is well established and published, how valuable that is for both patients and also the doctors.
Okay. I'm going to kind of do like a Tim Ferriss type question here. If you could have a billboard with anything on it, what would it be and why?
That's a tough one. Good one.
I know, that's why I asked you.
Well, it's not business related, I guess, right? I think I would say, billboard would say, smile and change the world.
Okay, Josh. All right. We'll let that one go. That's pretty good. It's pretty good. Okay. So obviously I'm not probably doing you guys due justice, but I am curious. So let's say that I didn't ask you everything I possibly could have. If you were in my shoes, what did I neglect to ask you that really is kind of that nugget, that secret sauce that's like, oh, come on, Orlando, please ask me that question. I'm ready to knock it out over the plate. Please just toss it right there. So slow pitch. I'll be happy to kind of answer this question for you. What is it that I didn't ask you, Josh, that you're like, yeah, let me tell you about this?
No, I'm having trouble. I'm having trouble with that one, Orlando. I think you asked a lot of good questions. I think I guess I would just say, like, is this doable for the regular person? And the answer is yes, for sure. The things we talked about before, we do have this website that can take the images in for you. We're available to help and make this as easy as possible. And I think that overwhelmingly, when we see people who get these things, get these video reports, they love them. They find them incredibly valuable. And for their family members as well. We've gotten a lot of compliments on that, and I would encourage people to give it a shot.
Thank you so much, Josh. Really appreciate your time. I appreciate you giving our podcast a ability to be able to give it a shot with being able to talk to you about this revolutionary kind of, change, as you mentioned, from 100 years of doing, either handwritten, now type notes, to really saying, hey, this is you. This is what aspects of normalcy are. Here, let me show you what that looks like. And in showing that, I mean, you've been able to show us, really the aspect of what Mediphany is doing and how it's kind of changing the context of patients' understanding and hopefully health outcomes. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you here.
Thanks so much, Orlando. It was great talking to you.
Likewise.